What motivated me to become a mentor is I grew up with my cousin who was around the same age as I was, and he got into some trouble and went to prison and spent a large part of his life in prison. And we played together, and then I went through a long stretch of time where I didn't see him because he was in prison. And so it was that experience and the invitation to become a member of the Nurture, Support, and Accountability team as a mentor, which prompted me to think, if my cousin had an organization like Mission Behind Bars and Beyond, things would have turned out a lot differently for him. And so it was that experience that really compelled me to become a mentor. Well, the church where I attend had a Nurture, Support, and Accountability group that was started by a pastor who was a friend of mine, and several other members of the congregation and people who were friends of the congregation formed the Nurture, Support, and Accountability group. They were a combination of pastors and licensed social workers and laity and really people from a variety of walks of life who I knew most of them. And the leader of the group, who was a pastor and a licensed counselor, I had known this individual for more than 20 years, and he asked me if I would be willing to join the group. They were, again, as I said, they were older, and so I think I was, 20 or 30 years younger, and they thought that it might be helpful to have younger perspective on the team or on the group. And so, they knew me and trusted me and thought that I might be a good role model for some people who are re-entering society after serving some time in prison. And I think that's what drew them or prompted them to invite me to join them. They wanted solid people who were responsible and they thought could be good support, good sources of support for people. And they told each of us that there would be training that would be provided. And so I did participate in like 6 hours of training on a weekend. I believe Mark and Dean led us through that training, and that I felt really prepared. But no, we weren't all licensed counselors, but we had a good mix of people. There were some licensed counselors who were part of the group, but there were people who had a variety of professions who served on the Nurture, Support, and Accountability group. We were able to bring in different experiences to help people. So some of us knew more about like getting a job now as opposed to someone who was retired and who may not know the latest in like developing or preparing a resume, for instance, or interviewing. A lot of that changes from, over a period of years, and someone like me or some of the other younger members of the Nurture, Support, and Accountability group were able to speak to some of the day-to-day issues that younger people who were coming out of prison, or even older people who were coming out of prison and looking for work, or who needed transportation. We had a good mix of people who were able to speak to a variety of issues that people returning to communities after serving some time in prison would be able to, we were just able to help them with different issues that they were confronted with. Some of us were more skilled and are more knowledgeable about some areas and some issues than others. Well, I think you need to be a good listener. You need to be a very sincere person, someone who's truly committed to helping people through a difficult transition, someone who is resourceful, and I've always been interested in helping people, and so even in the work that I've done, when I first became involved with nurture, support, and accountability, I worked for the national offices of the Presbyterian Church, and so I was a church professional for more than 20 years, even though I'm not ordained clergy, but I was an officer in the church, and so that was sort of a natural fit for me to be involved in a ministry like Mission Behind Bars and Beyond. That, coupled with my experience with my cousin, my concern for humankind, and my concern that we as a society maybe haven't done all that we need to do to help people who are really serious about becoming productive members of society again. And professionally now, I work in human resources and I work for a second chance organization. So today, all of those things, work together to make me someone who's still committed to helping people make the transition. Being a mentor has impacted my life by making me more aware of the difficulties that people face when they're making a change that is that significant as moving from a life in prison to a life outside of prison. I'm much more in tune in my job. My current job is serve as the Director of Human Resources for a company that, as I mentioned earlier, is a second chance employer, and so I'm much more sensitive to the challenges that people face, the questions that people ask, the opportunities that people don't get because of assumptions that people may make when they see that someone has a record. I'm much more sensitive to that than I maybe would have been. I think I'm also more aware of the privileges that I have as a person who has never been convicted of anything, the privileges that I enjoy. And when you hear people who are clients of Mission Behind Bars and Beyond tell their stories to nurture, support, and accountability groups, you become painfully aware of the privileges that those of us who are often on the nurture, support, and accountability groups, you're painfully aware of the privileges that we have and that we forget about or take for granted. One thing that I want people to know is that Mission Behind Bars and Beyond does a wonderful job preparing its mentors and training its mentors. It does a fantastic job really providing a gamut of services for people who are returning to their communities and to their families. The organization is providing case management now, and the people who are on the nurture, support, and accountability groups are really, really committed. The people would be amazed at the just the simplest things, or things that we think are simple, that really mean a lot to people who are returning from prison. I just remember one of the first people that I served as a mentor for needed transportation. He was a young 36-year-old out of prison. He didn't have a car, he didn't have a job, he didn't have a way to get to job interviews. And so the one thing I knew that I could do is I could afford to go out and buy some bus tickets and to give him some bus tickets, at least enough to get him to several interviews. And the look on his face when I showed up the next day, the next week with bus tickets that he could use, I mean, it was just, I thought to myself, well, it's only bus tickets, but to him, it really opened the door for him. He did use the bus tickets to get to job interviews, and he found a job very quickly. He was promoted on the job twice within a year. He's found better and better apartments. He now has a car, and he's just done wonderfully. Sometimes it's the simplest thing that can make things that you think that are the simplest thing can end up being making a world of difference for someone who's returning to their community. There was a young 36-year-old who had just gotten out of prison. He had no transportation. He he needed a job, but he needed transportation to the job. And I knew that as a member of the Nurture, Support, and Accountability group that I could at least buy some bus tickets so that this gentleman could get transportation to a job. And the look on his face when I showed up the next week with bus tickets was just priceless. I mean, he was ecstatic. He used the bus tickets to go on job interviews. He got a job fairly quickly. He was promoted on the job twice. That enabled him to get an apartment the first month or two that he was on the job. When he got a promotion, he got a better apartment. He eventually got a car. We started out seeing this individual as a Nurture, Support, and Accountability group. We started out seeing him once a month. We then we actually started out seeing him maybe twice a month, and we moved to once a month, and then we moved to once every other month, and then we moved to once a quarter. And each time he seems to be adjusting better and better each time. There are challenges that he still faces, but he is really bonded with our group. He feels very comfortable sharing those struggles with them, and he's really has expressed his appreciation for all that we've been able to do for him.